Thank you. The next item of business is a debate on motion 20720 in the name of Shona Robinson on the Budget Scotland No. 5 bill at stage 1. And I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons. And I call on Cabinet Secretary Shona Robinson to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 9 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am very pleased to open today's Stage 1 debate on the Budget Scotland No. 5 bill. So this budget invests £68 billion in Scotland's families, in essential services like the NHS that support them, and in the infrastructure that underpins our national prosperity. With the support of members across this chamber, the choices that we've made will be felt meaningfully by people here in Scotland. This budget will give every primary school child in Scotland the chance to learn to swim. It will establish new high-street GP walk-in centres and provide almost £22.5 billion to deliver and reform the health and care services that we all rely on. It will encourage entrepreneurship by providing support and funding to our young future business leaders, and it's expected to leave more than half of Scottish taxpayers with more money as a result of living here in Scotland. Since the draft budget was introduced, the Government has engaged widely across this Parliament and beyond. We've listened carefully to the views of committees, local government, business, the third sector and wider civic society. And I've valued my constructive discussions with opposition members and parties across the chamber. And, as the First Minister noted earlier, such engagement helps to ensure that we have the best support for the people of Scotland. I am therefore very pleased that the Liberal Democrats have confirmed their support for this budget. I'll give way to Craig Hoy, who of course has not managed to secure anything through this budget process. But I'm sure he'll be full of suggestions.
I would not want our party's name associated with anything in this budget, because at the end of the day, this Scottish Government, this Scottish Government has just said it is positively engaged with stakeholders. What does she say to COSLA that says that this budget is insufficient to avoid significant cuts or large increases to council tax?
Cabinet Secretary.
I had an excellent meeting with COSLA group leaders, including the Conservative group leader in COSLA yesterday, and I've had lots of messages today welcoming the money for the real living wage, additional money for social care. But I think that will go on the record that Craig Hoy doesn't welcome anything in this budget. So all of the money for affordable housing, all the money to support businesses, all the money to support children and families, not a penny of it does Craig Hoy support. And I think that will haunt him for some time to come. Presiding Officer, we have also been transparent that this is a budget, of course, where we've had to make difficult choices. With increasing demand on public services and low funding growth, there has to be trade-offs, and I'm confident that the choices that we have made are ones that will secure a fair, healthy and prosperous society for Scotland's people. Child poverty remains the Government's top priority, and this budget sets out investment that will make a material difference to families across Scotland. For example, by August 2027, we'll deliver a universal breakfast club offer for primary school-aged children, and will increase wraparound activity clubs for primary school-aged children as well. We're also investing more than £111 million in our Tackling Child Poverty Fund and in whole family support to provide wraparound support to families in poverty. Support for the most vulnerable includes universal services like free prescriptions and university tuition, services this Government chooses to continue to invest in. Presiding Officer, turning now to non-domestic rates, I committed to passing on to hospitality any additional consequential funding from the UK Government's recent announcement on business rates for pubs and music venues in England. We consulted the business community prior to finalising our package, and I can confirm that the Scottish Government will provide 25% additional relief for the next 3 years for licensed hospitality and music venues, including pubs, restaurants, hotels, nightclubs and licensed clubs, on the basic and intermediate property rates. Along with the 15% retail, hospitality and leisure relief announced at the budget for properties on the basic or intermediate property rate, total relief for eligible licensed hospitality premises and music venues will be 40% for the next 3 years, capped at £110,000 per business per year. Now, the Scottish Fiscal Commission will cost this, but we estimate that this will provide around £9 million of additional support in 26-27. I have also listened to concerns raised by the self-catering sector, and I'll introduce a specific revaluation transitional relief for this sector, capping increases in gross liabilities due to revaluation at 15% year on year up to the next revaluation. I'm happy to take John Mason if he still wants to come
John
in.
Mason.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary very much for giving way. How does she respond when people would say, well, we're short of money for social work and care and some of these things? Some hospitality businesses are very profitable. They're expanding, they're busy, they're doing very well. Why should they get more support?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, look, I take John Mason's point, but we also have to make sure that our hospitality sector, which can be the life and blood of many towns and villages across Scotland, is able to continue. And given all the headwinds that they have had from the employers' national insurance contributions, the hike in VAT that has put the cost of all the produce up and up, we believe that this is an appropriate package. And taken together, we estimate that these measures will provide around £40 million in additional relief over the next 3 years, demonstrating our commitment to supporting business. While this, I'll give way just now.
Willie Rennie.
Can I welcome the measures that have been set out? I had many self-catering businesses, particularly in my constituency, who were going to have their whole profits wiped out altogether. So I'm hoping that this is going to make a significant difference. And it isn't just for 1 year, but is for 3 years. But what lessons can we learn from this valuation process? Because we can't come back here again every time we have a valuation problem.
Of course, revaluation, it is an independent process as agreed by this Parliament, and of course there are always winners and losers out of these processes, but I am sure that there will be reflection around how we make sure that there is transitional relief where that is required, and I'm sure there are always lessons to be learned. I want to make some progress. So while this budget is rooted firmly in the priorities of this government, it's also been shaped by meaningful engagement with others with whom we identified many areas of common ground. So this included a shared priority across parties to support our colleges, and I welcome the positive recognition of the 10% uplift on last year's core budget by the Finance and Public Administration Committee, reflecting a response from commentators and the sector. Some parties and members advocated for specific areas in the budget, and I want to thank them for their constructive approach. This has meant that we'll deliver improvements in neurodevelopmental assessments and care of children and young people, which will see investment of over £7.5 million in 26-27 and growing future investment. We'll invest £9 million over the next 3 years to support communities impacted by the closure of the Fife ethylene plant at Mossmoran, and will provide a 3-year settlement for disabled people's organisations with £3.5 million of funding in 26-27 and in each of the subsequent 2 years. On hospices, the draft budget set out an initial commitment of £6.5 million in 26-27, with further engagement planned to understand what support would be required to deliver pay parity with agenda for change for hospice staff. I can confirm today that we'll prioritise an additional £2.9 million for the sector. It's in this spirit of listening and engagement that I can also confirm that, providing the bill passes stage 1 today, the Government intends to take forward amendments at stage 2. So a fair settlement for local government came through cross-party discussions. We're proud that this budget includes almost £15.7 billion of funding for local government, a 2% real terms increase in 26-27 compared to last year's budget. However, I continued to engage with COSLA since the budget was published and listened to their concerns, and as a result, I can today confirm my intention to allocate a further £20 million to the local government settlement for social care, which they can use towards funding the real living wage for adult and childcare sectors. The Investing in Communities Fund supports community-led organisations and deprived and fragile communities to tackle disadvantaged and poverty on their own terms, delivering projects, services and activities that are identified and developed by the Community communities themselves. And like members across this chamber, I've seen the value these community projects have in our constituencies across Scotland. We recognise calls to provide stability for these organisations, and that's why we propose to allocate a further £5.33 million of new resource funding and prioritise a further £1.6 million from within the budget, taking the total available funding to £9.13 million, extending this fund in full for 26-27. Presiding Officer, I have to say, in stark contrast to the UK Government cutting the funding for local growth in Scotland. As announced by the First Minister earlier today, another amendment the Government is proposing is the delivery of a freeze to all ScotRail fares, including season tickets and FlexiPass, until April 2027, and that will be welcome news for many commuters. And that's also why I will allocate £4.3 million of additional resource funding in 26-27 to the transport portfolio to deliver this freeze to ScotRail fares. This builds on other measures in the budget, such as the removal of peak fares on the Northern Isles ferries for our island communities and the continued removal of ScotRail peak fares for good. So this afternoon I'll write to the Finance and Public Administration Committee to set out the detail of the proposed amendments that will be lodged at Stage 2 for its consideration. In conclusion, I remind the Chamber that while this Government has set out a budget which delivers a strong economy, strong public services and a stronger support for families, it remains a shared responsibility to deliver this for the Scottish people by supporting this budget bill, and I move that the Parliament agrees to the general principles of the Budget Scotland No. 5 bill.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I now call on Kenneth Gibson on behalf of the Finance and Public Administration Committee. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to speak in today's Stage 1 budget on behalf of the Finance and Public Administration Committee, following publication of our Scottish Budget 2026-27 report, and I look forward to receiving the Stage 2 amendments which the Cabinet Secretary for Finance has touched on just a moment ago. As this is the final Stage 1 budget bill debate this parliamentary session, I'm keen to discuss issues we've raised which have been key themes throughout our scrutiny over the years. I also wish to thank our excellent committee team of MSPs and clerks who have worked so hard and with dedication throughout this past half-decade, and I can see Liz Smith nodding in approval. This year's draft budget was published much later than usual on the 13th of January 2026 as a consequence of the late UK budget. As we noted, this provided an unacceptably short time for parliamentary scrutiny of the Scottish Government's proposed tax and spending plans for the next financial year. Not for the first time, the committee has called on the UK Government to give much greater regard to devolved budgets when setting the timing of future fiscal events. The need for greater transparency in relation to budgetary information has been another consistent theme. The committee recognises improvements made by Scottish ministers throughout this parliamentary session in providing more budgetary data and presenting it more clearly. However, like many witnesses and commentators, we are frustrated and disappointed that despite repeated requests, the Scottish Government has fallen short of baselining all routine in-year transfers. We have therefore recommended that formal agreement is reached between the Scottish Government and the Scottish Fiscal Commission on how regular in-year transfers should be presented. We also seek greater clarity on which elements of funding announces new money to provide certainty for public bodies and local government to avoid the unhelpful and unnecessary confusion that has occurred this year, notably in relation to increased funding for the college sector and where money saved from mitigating the two-child cap will be spent. The committee also expressed concerns that one-off ScotWind leasing revenues are being used to plug funding gaps rather than being allocated to net zero projects as intended. As we note in our report, the Scottish Government appears to bank on the fact it won't actually need to draw down ScotWind funds as new monies are considered certain to become available, particularly in the run-up to the next UK general election. The committee is not convinced that this is an efficient or effective way to manage Scotland's public finances. Our 26-27 budget report recognises significant financial pressures faced by the Scottish Government and its limited flexibilities to manage cash flow over years. We therefore believe that a comprehensive review of the fiscal framework is now urgent, and it's encouraging that the two governments are currently discussing the scope of this, and we welcome the opportunity just before Christmas to input the committee's views on the priority areas for the review. We support a continuation of this consultative approach while balancing the need for early resolution. On Scottish Government spending plans, the college sector will receive a very welcome uplift in funding, one the committee had called for. Housing is an even more impressive boost. And while I welcome the additional £20 million announced today, the committee has significant concerns that pressures on local government finances may lead to large council tax rises and some local authorities struggling to meet their statutory obligations. We have therefore urged the Scottish Government in a report to discuss with local government how and where further support might be provided to ease such pressures if additional funds become available. A long-term committee concern is the sustainability of social security spending and its impact on other areas of the Scottish budget which are being squeezed. It's disappointing that Scottish ministers have yet to undertake the reviews we asked for on the fiscal sustainability of social security spending, the extent to which it supports economic activity and the outcomes arising from universal payments and services. We therefore urge the incoming government to undertake this work without delay. On taxation, while recognising fiscal pressures in the Scottish budget, we have asked the next Scottish Government to consider the most effective way to ensure a fairer, more gradual and transparent approach to raising income tax revenues than continue to use fiscal drag, a policy also imposed by successive UK governments. A further priority next session should be reform of local government taxation, not easy given the likely level of loss aversion, but necessary. The committee has consistently urged the Scottish Government to recognise and respond to long-term fiscal sustainability challenges that lie ahead, given demographic trends. Unfortunately, the Scottish Government did not, as requested, fully respond to the Scottish Fiscal Commission's two key fiscal sustainability reports in 2023 and 2025. Regarding the medium-term funding outlook, publication of the first Scottish spending review outcomes for both capital and resources session is welcome. While this should bring more certainty to portfolios, public bodies and local government on the spending trajectory over the next 3 years, we agree with witnesses that more details should have been provided, and despite a request, the Scottish Government appear not to have taken a zero-based budgeting approach to the spending review. Indeed, the document includes little detail on the approach taken, leaving uncertainty over the figures presented. We will, of course, be taking evidence on the Scottish spending review and the infrastructure delivery pipeline in the weeks ahead. Witnesses shared concerns about whether plans to make £1.5 billion of cumulative efficiencies across the spending review period are achievable and how progress will be reported. We urge the next government to regularly report savings made, to allow scrutiny of progress towards overall efficiency targets, clarifying any impacts on public service delivery. While welcoming the Scottish Government's infrastructure delivery pipeline, we had pressed for this document since December 2023, and it is frankly underwhelming. Details should have been provided on costs, timelines and potential overruns for the projects. In addition, the split between delivery and development casts doubt on exactly what will be delivered, when and at what cost. Given that the UK Government will reduce Scotland's capital allocation in real terms over the forecast period, inclusion of shovel-ready projects to optimise capital investment would be helpful. We urge the incoming Scottish Government to flesh out both the pipeline and the Scottish Spending Review document with much more detail. Presiding Officer, the committee looks forward to receiving a response to a Stage 1 report ahead of Stage 2 proceedings on the bill next week, and I look forward to hearing members' contributions in today's debate. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Gibson. I now call on Craig Hoyt on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. This budget does not add up. It doesn't add up for Scottish taxpayers, with more people dragged into ever higher tax under the SNP. It doesn't add up for Scottish councils, which are now considering brutal cuts and blistering increases in council tax, despite the discovery of an additional £20 million today for social care. And it doesn't add up for Scotland's NHS, with health boards effectively facing no real terms growth in spending. And it certainly doesn't add up for Scotland's pubs and shops, which, despite today's U-turn on reliefs, still face crippling increases in business tax. I will take an intervention.
Deputy First Minister.
Member accept that the one thing that this budget does do is add up, because it has to be balanced, and where would he find £1 billion?
Craig Hoyt.
The Scottish Government is under a legal obligation to make sure this budget balances, but it is balancing. But before Mr Swinney has a breakdown, it is being balanced using non-recurring revenues, raiding the Scotland monies to pay for recurring revenues. It is therefore no, I will not give way. But the only place where this,
First Minister, please let Mr Hoyt continue.
If Mr Swinney wants to do with the £1 billion, it's going to cut from cutting the SNP's bloated benefits bill, getting rid of the pork barrel politics, getting rid of the pork barrel politics,
Mr Hoyt,
where John Swinney is buying votes from one.
Mr Hoy, could you please resume your seat for a second? Could I just say to members that I think we would expect better behaviour all round here, and listen to Mr Hoy, who has the floor. Mr Hoy.
Thank you. I don't quite know who's rattled Mr Swinney's cage today, but it is certainly rattled. The only person that this budget appears to add up for is Shona Robertson, because she initially thought it provided her with nearly enough coverage to get out the door in May. But analysts have warned that this won't hold, because whoever replaces her will almost inevitably be forced back to this Parliament with an emergency statement to fix the mistakes she has made. OK, so let's look at some of the details in her plans. The government insists it is properly funding our NHS, but today, don't take my word for it, David Phillips from the IFS says funding allocations for health in 2026-27 look, and I quote Mr Swinney, increasingly detached from reality. So excluding social care pay, health and social care funding is up only 1.6% in cash terms, but down 0.6% in real terms. But Agenda for Change staff are due a pay increase of 3.75%, and resident doctors have been awarded 9.4%. So something serious is going to have to give at the front line of NHS. Now, the Cabinet Secretary has repeated again today I don't have time. The Cabinet Secretary has repeatedly claimed that this budget offers a fair deal for Scotland's councils. But COSLA Minister begs to differ. It has admitted that some services offered, which are, and I quote, critical to population health, will be slashed this April. And despite her claims, over the period covered by this budget and the spending review, councils are set to see a real terms cut in their cash settlement. This means more cuts and higher bills, not just this year, but right through to the end of the decade. And is it any wonder, therefore, that the Accounts Commission has warned that combined Scotland's 32 local authorities face a budget black hole of nearly £1 billion by 2027. That's 500 times more than the £20 million that the government has come forward today. And that means there is a very real risk of Scotland's councils collapsing into bankruptcy by the end of the decade. Whilst council tax bills for hard-working Scots are set to climb. And it's not just council tax that will rise as a result of this bad SNP budget. Yet again, the SNP are reaching for the only lever they ever pull, clobbering middle-income earners with higher income tax bills. And by the end of this decade, 1 in 3 Scots will be paying the SNP's higher rates of tax, a tax intended for the few, now being paid by the many. And why is tax soaring in Scotland? Because under the SNP, the benefits bill is frankly out of control. By the end of the decade, SNP ministers will be spending £10 billion on social security. And the truth is this. The SNP is happy to park people on benefits, many with treatable mental health conditions, because that culture of dependency creates political advantage for John Swinney. It is the crudest form of vote buying. It is cynical, it is unsustainable, and it is frankly wrong. And the sad fact, Presiding Officer, is that this dismal budget will pass in this Parliament. Because I don't have time. Because Scottish Labour is too weak, too divided and too distracted to stand up to the SNP. And the SNP government has shown itself unfit for office, but Scottish Labour has shown itself incapable of real opposition. Meanwhile, the Liberal Democrats will back the budget, despite being conned last year by the broken promise of no spending on independence. In a smoke-filled room somewhere in Butte House, post-election promises are no doubt being made. Alex Cole-Hamilton will be measuring up the curtains along the ministerial colleagues. The man who bought a Tesla and then sold a Tesla to Virtue Signal is eyeing up the government's car fleet. But beyond the cosy left-wing consensus and the dubious deal-making, people out there in the real world are looking for a new approach. And I won't give way to Mr. I don't have time, unless I get the time back. No, there is no time. I'll be very happy to enter a smoke-filled room and to find out what other deals they are doing. But ultimately, we go into this election campaign with a very clear set of tax pledges. On income tax, we would raise the higher rate thresholds, bringing them into line with the rest of the UK over the next Parliament. Scotland's tax rate is too complicated and uncompetitive, so we would cut the basic and intermediate rates of tax to 19 pence. And in recent weeks, we've also outlined a serious package of support for business which goes way beyond that of the SNP government. And we will do this by lowering the ballooning SNP benefits bill. Our welfare proposals will make work pay. Now, the cosy left-wing consensus here in Holyrood wants to keep taxes high, and along with reform, it also supports more benefit spending. But in 85 days, Scottish workers will have an opportunity to vote for a party that will both cut tax and reduce the benefits bill, and that party is the Scottish Conservative Party.
Thank you. I now call on Michael Mara. Around 5 minutes, please.
Oh, indeed. Thank you, Presiding Officer. On 13th of January, the Cabinet Secretary announced a deeply underwhelming budget that tried to fix just a few of the SNP's mistakes. And I said then that it would find favour, whether over a peace pipe or not, with the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, and so it has proven. The budget will pass stage 1 today, and Labour will not stand in the way of police officers, nurses and local services continuing to be paid at the start of the new financial year in just a few short weeks. But we all know, Presiding Officer, that the budget will not last the year. Independent experts from the Institute for Fiscal Studies and the Fraser Allender Institute are unanimous in their view that, as a result of the SNP decisions, this budget, for whoever forms the government is an emergency budget, is now a racing certainty. We know the chaos that was wrought by 3 consecutive years of emergency budgets from the SNP, forced to rip up their plans mid-year due to their own incompetence. But only today, First Minister, we hear from the Institute for Fiscal Studies' David Phillips that the budget looks, and I quote, increasingly detached from reality. This doesn't feel like credible fiscal and public spending control to me. Well, he's right. It's not credible, and it doesn't deserve to be passed with this Parliament in that regard. And to compound the mess, no thank you, sir, to compound the mess, we have the ludicrous situation where the Finance Secretary publishes a 3-year spending review to supposedly provide certainty to public services, and within days tells the Finance Committee it's not worth the paper it's written on, and she fully expects it to change. It is budgeting on a wing and a prayer. These are the hallmarks of 19 years of John Swinney budgets: creative accounting, financial sleight of hand and swinging cuts to local government. And the truth is that this SNP government has decimated Scotland's public finances, no thank you sir, and taken treasured public services like our NHS to the brink. Hundreds of thousands of Scots on NHS waiting lists, over 10,000 children in temporary accommodation, no thank you sir, a housing emergency, a justice system past breaking point, an education system going backwards, a culture of secrecy where public sector managers offer bribes, and Health Secretary, you might listen to this, no thank you, a culture of secrecy where public sector managers offer bribes and holidays to grieving families rather than honest answers and accepting responsibility. This budget changes none of that, no thank you. Instead, the SNP tinker round the edges and tell us all, in the face of all of the evidence to the contrary, that the NHS is turning a corner. It's ludicrous. The SNP has decimated local services and taken those local authorities to the brink. And if they get to back in May, they plan to cut nearly £500 million from councils. On non-domestic rates, yet again this SNP government has failed to go far enough, leaving many businesses in dire straits. And today's announcement is an improvement on some of the measures announced on 13th of January, but it does not properly address the looming revaluation. They should call time on that revaluation today. Scottish Labour supports an immediate pause to the new rates revaluation. The government should act now. Yes, sir.
Clear. Briefly.
I'm very grateful. I understand that the primary audience for Mr Maher's contribution are Labour members ahead of their impending leadership contest. But what I'm confused about is of the great many flaws that he's apparently identified in this budget. Why did he not propose a solution to a single one of them before the Labour Party decided to abstain, allowing the budget to pass, regardless of what either the Greens or the Liberal Democrats negotiated? Surely, if the budget is so terrible, Mr Mara would have made a single proposed change before allowing it to sail through.
Michael Mara, give you the time back.
And I thank Mr Greer for the intervention. I would gently say to him that I would not believe every word that the Cabinet Secretary says. Over 4 meetings, I set out a list of things that we wanted to see in this budget. I was left at the end of it saying, we'll get back to you. I'm afraid that she never did. Now, it's familiar to say, no thank you, familiar to say, I don't take it personally, presiding officer, being ghosted in such a way. I don't take it personally. But when you're going to dance, it takes two. The government has to be willing. The government has to be willing, Cabinet Secretary, to strike a deal. No, thank you. We can maybe dance later. The fact remains that this SNP government will never take the bold, decisive action needed to fix what they have broken in our country. The real opportunity for change will be on May the 7th, when we finally kick out this knackered SNP government and choose a new direction for Scotland with Scottish Labour.
Thank you. I'm going to allow a little bit of reaction, but we do still need to hear the member who has the microphone. I call Ross Greer. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Greens, in our time in opposition, have always taken a constructive approach to budget negotiations. We've always believed that our job is to make green change happen. That's what we told voters we would do if we were elected here, and we were elected here. Making fiery and impassioned speeches can often feel very satisfying, but it doesn't save a single species, it doesn't reduce emissions, it doesn't create jobs or feed children. Change does that. Negotiating in good faith to deliver what the people of Scotland need and what our planet needs does that. Now, most of the last decade has obviously been one of minority government, and I am very proud of the huge achievements of the Greens during our time in opposition over the last decade through those budget negotiations. And I've always appreciated the Scottish Government's constructive approach. It's been easier for us to come to agreements in some years than in others, but I've always found a default position from the Government to be a willingness to talk, a willingness to engage with the ideas that we put forward. And you can see across the country the impact of the changes Greens have secured. Even just in the last few weeks, the impact of our budget negotiations last year has been felt. Starting on the 31st of January, those who commute on the bus in Shetland are now benefiting from the fact that that is capped. Single bus fares are capped at £2. This month and next month, that is being rolled out across the rest of the Highlands and Islands. Now, particularly for those who have to commute by bus over long distances, the only public transport option available, of course, in many rural areas, that is resulting already in huge savings that will very quickly add up into the hundreds of pounds for commuters. That is the very real impact of constructively engaging in the budget process, and it builds on previous Green successes, most obviously free bus travel for everyone under the age of 22. Hundreds of millions of journeys have now been taken by Scotland's young people. Some genuinely life-changing opportunities have been made available to them as a result of that. We also scrapped peak rail fares, something that again has saved commuters hundreds and in a few cases thousands of pounds a year. During a cost of living crisis, that is a policy that both delivers for our planet by reducing private car use, but also delivers for the public. It helps families save money. And this year, through our discussions so far, we've secured more money for bus franchising, bringing our buses back under public control, ending a 4-decade-long Thatcherite experiment in privatisation, something that I'm quite sure is perhaps holding the Labour Party back from giving their full support for this budget, given who's cutting them six-figure cheques these days. But the Scottish Government and Scotland as a whole is still failing when it comes to reducing our transport emissions. We do need to go further. That's why the Greens put forward other proposals in this budget. It's why we are still keen to see more progress on that front. I welcome today's changes in the budget. Gillian Mackay raised with the Cabinet Secretary on the 27th of January the need for more funding for social care. I'm glad the Government has made that possible. On the 7th of January, Maggie Chapman raised the issues around the Investing in Communities Fund. I'm glad that the Government has been able to find a solution to that. I announced earlier today that the Greens would be abstaining at this point on the budget. I am proud of what we've achieved so far. I do believe that agreement is possible with the Government, but I think our job is to be the challenger. Our job is to push the Government to go further, often to push the Government to go outside of its comfort zone, because we know that change is still needed. We know that people across the country right now are really hurting. We know that families cannot afford skyrocketing bills, the cost of the weekly shop, the cost of their daily commute, regardless of what form of transport they use. And we know that further change is possible. Yes, the powers of devolution are limited. Yes, Scotland's public finances are under a huge amount of pressure. But there are options still available to us. There is more we can do to reduce the cost of childcare, to reduce the cost of public transport. There is more we can do to protect our planet. There is more we can invest and once again become a world leader when it comes to climate action and nature restoration. I believe that there is still an agreement that is possible between the Greens and the Government. If the Cabinet Secretary is willing to continue those discussions, we will engage in them in good faith, and I hope that we'll be able to reach an agreement before stage 3.
Thank you, Mr Graham. And I call Jamie Green. Around 4 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, the late Jim Wallace commented on the great cross-party efforts that brought about devolution in the first place. He said, "I hope that this can be a new style of politics," because those were the founding principles of this Parliament: collaboration, consensus and compromise. Cross-party talks in a Parliament where no single party was ever meant to have a majority. In the words of another great, Donald Dewar, when this Parliament first convened, he said, "We should be striving to do the right thing by the people of Scotland." But some parties choose not to engage. They choose not to sit down and negotiate and fight their corner for the causes that matter to them. They perhaps have their sights set on May's election. And looking at the polls, I don't blame them, because, Mr Hoy, the only cosy consensus that exists that I can see is the complete evaporation of the benches opposite. So where are we at on this budget? On health. On health, properly funded social care is important. Why? Because it frees up beds in hospitals. It gets people out of hospital and back home. And let's be honest, social care providers told us they wanted a fairer funding deal to pay their staff properly. And I'll be honest, I do think the government mucked this up the first time. Let's be honest. I think they know it, the sector knew it, and so did I. And that's why it went top of my list of asks. That extra £20 million to ensure that every social care worker in Scotland is paid the real living wage matters. Look, will it fix the wider issues in the care sector? No, I don't think it will. But it does matter to those care providers who have been lobbying us fiercely these past 2 weeks. On the issue of waiting lists, autism and ADHD assessment waiting times are ridiculously and unacceptably high in Scotland. Some people are waiting 6 years. 65,000 people are on an assessment waiting list. And that is why it's been a long-standing Lib Dem campaign, and I think it's something we're proud of. The extra £7.5 million announced that we negotiated will help towards tackling this backlog, but we do need to see progress speed up on that. And again, on hospices. Hospices, every one of us has one in our local community. They provide invaluable care for people at the end of their lives. It's a very live debate, but they did need extra cash. And I asked for extra cash. £6.5 million in the draft budget, topped up today by nearly £3 million announced by the First Minister. That takes us to about £9.5 million, and that will help places like our Gowan Hospice in my community. I received an email this afternoon from Hospices UK, actually, just simply one line thanking me for fighting their case. And the question is really, how many other parties got one of those emails this afternoon? I know the budget is all theatre. It's all theatre, but it does matter. The reason this stuff matters is that every penny counts towards supporting... Yes, seriously, Miss Bailey, would you like to intervene? Would you like to intervene? Because you're shouting at me from the front there. Did you get an email from the sector thanking you for supporting them?
I actually
Jackie
did,
Bailey,
because the difference is that this isn't the first time I've stood up to support hospices or social care, but have done so consistently over a number of years.
Jamie Green. The big difference, Miss Bailey, though, is that you walked away from the discussion and negotiation on day one.
Chair, please.
Day one, because this is a budget that was going to pass anyway. This is a budget that was passing anyway, thanks to Mr Mara and his front bench. Look, there is stuff in this budget that I am concerned about. I call for example, for a complete freeze on business rates for all hospitality businesses, as they have done in Northern Ireland. But at the end of the day, this is not my budget. This is the government's budget, and they must make those and own those decisions. The £178 million relief package that we did get, let me tell you, is far more than what I got when I started this negotiation. The same goes for the funding for college sectors. The same goes for the funding we achieve for young entrepreneurs. Will all of this save the perilous state of the Scottish economy? No, it will not. But the main difference between the approach that I've taken and the approach of others in this chamber is simple. I did not walk away from this game with nothing. This budget was always going to pass. And the question is, for opposition members, is what did you get out of it, Mr Hoy? What did you get out of this budget? I got £300 million. And let me tell you, from as far as I can see, that's £300 million than anyone else in this room.
Thank you. We now move to the open debate. I call first Michelle Thompson, to be followed by Liz Smith. Up to 4 minutes, please, Ms Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And firstly, can I note that I'm disappointed at the length of this debate? The budget's absolutely at the heart of what any government activity. And so to be conducted on a Thursday afternoon, and frankly what some people consider the graveyard slot, and with such restricted time, I personally don't think is good enough. So I give apologies in advance to all members that I won't be able to take any interventions because of time, but it's absolutely the point of the debate. Anyway, on that note, what a week, what a week. Whoever promised Anas Sarwar that he would live in interesting times wasn't wrong. The release of the WhatsApp messages on Monday this week between Anas Sarwar's old friend Peter Mandelson and Wes Streeting told us a lot of things. Notable, of course, is the explicit criticism of Streeting's own Labour government for having, and I quote, no growth strategy. And this, of course, confirms what I've argued since their election. Whilst the UK government holds most of the levers needed to create a coherent growth strategy, including control of the tax regime, of key regulators, of borrowing to invest powers, and, of course, overall fiscal and economic powers, it's failed to use them. And here in Scotland, we've been captured within the chaos and failure of successive UK governments making. And within these challenges, there's a massive challenge, we face a fixed budget. So it is disappointing that yet again the Labour Party in Scotland refused to bring any proposals forward during budget negotiations and backed an expansionist position. Now, Mr Mara may wish to heckle from a sedentary position. If he wants to intervene in me and tell me why the Labour Party couldn't even be bothered and, in fact, sought to abstain before even the budget was brought forward, give me that compelling reason. Is he able to do that?
Michael Mara, briefly.
I certainly am. Over 4 meetings, we set out a range of different areas that we wanted to see investment. I was told that I would hear back, and we heard nothing. As I've said already, it takes two to dance, Ms Thompson.
Oh, he's a wee lamb, isn't he?
Thompson.
For goodness sake. The fact of the matter is, the leadership appears to knife their own Prime Minister in the back, but fails at every single turn to put the interests of the Scottish people first. Now, presiding officers, in this context that the Scottish Government has had to produce a draft budget in short order without knowing precisely the funding they will have to operate, and we still await clarification on consequentials. So I'd like to dwell for a short time on 2 criticisms I've previously shared regarding the constraints of the fiscal framework. I have said consistently the restricted borrowing powers limit the Scottish Government's ability to respond to in-year inflation, pay pressures and unseen events. The framework also constrains our ability to borrow to invest, which is fundamental to address productivity challenges. Now, second, I continue to be concerned that the challenging context has led to a reliance on one-off funds, and most noticeably the calling upon ScotWind Fund monies to fund day-to-day spending. And I have been consistent in calling that these funds must be used for long-term investment. So there has to be, and I think Mr McKee will have a view on this, there needs to be an even stronger focus on public sector reform and setting clear priorities. On the latter point too often cries from opposition parties to increase spending across many areas of government are not accompanied by explaining where that money is to come from. Witness Craig Hoy earlier. It reveals, quite frankly, they are not ready for the challenges of government. And as this is going to be my last budget speech, I want to finish off and recognise the work of the Scottish Fiscal Commission under the leadership of Professor Graham Roy. Their analysis is critical to us all to support the valuation and evidence-based decision-making. They do a super job, and I'm pleased to note, and I thank them, that they are continuing to broaden their analysis and improving data quality. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Thompson. At this point, given the earlier remarks, it's perhaps worth reminding the Chamber that the timing of this debate was agreed at the Bureau and then was subsequently agreed by Parliament, and I don't recall there being an amendment to that. I can also, though, tell the Chamber there's a little bit of time in hand, so recompense for interventions will be given for the foreseeable. How long that lasts, I don't know. I call Liz Smith to be followed by Stuart McMillan, around 4 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The convener gave what is a very good summary of the concerns that the Finance Committee has expressed about this budget process. But just before I make my remarks, can I add some context from 6 of our expert analysts who attended the committee on Tuesday just this week, and I think raised some very important issues that we should be thinking about. Firstly, that there isn't sufficient detail about Scottish Government policy priorities in relation to how well they actually deliver on the intended outcomes, and as a consequence of the very tight fiscal constraints, which policies have actually been deprioritised and why. Points which I think have actually frustrated the committee from time to time. And I thought Professor Heald particularly made a very interesting remark that the Scottish Government is often more generous in its approach to spending than the rest of the UK, but seldom do we ever see the reverse of that. And we certainly don't see where the money is coming from. And I think that is at the heart of this budget when it comes to the policy decisions. Secondly, and this was a point that was made very strongly by the Auditor-General, that there's absolutely no credible long-term plan to address the very significant challenges arising from the bloated welfare state budget, the demands of health, which we've seen from David Phillips today, and from social care. The Scottish Government appears to favour the short-term fix instead, rather than giving... we had concerns over the lack of baseline in the budget, and it's extremely difficult to track actually where that money is being spent effectively. And thirdly, these analysts are saying that when it comes to local government, they are facing a very serious issue of fiscal unsustainability in the long run, which is definitely putting frontline services under threat, and obviously there is the threat of significant council tax rises in April. So these are all very important points. They don't come from me or from the Scottish Conservatives. They come from our highly respected, and I agree with what Michelle Thompson said about the Scottish Fiscal Commission, they come from our experts who go into a deep dive when it comes to the Scottish budget, and I think we should listen to what they have to say. And in light of these concerns, I think we have to ask why successive Scottish budgets have adopted policies which undermine the stated overall objectives, especially when it comes to economic growth. Why on earth does the Scottish Government believe that its policy on the non-domestic rates issue, and it's good to see some mitigation and relief, on the visitor levy, on removing the small business bonus when it comes to deer management and some of the rural businesses, why on earth is that seen to be a policy net that will provide greater growth in the economy? And that's also true. The Cabinet Secretary for Health has just left the chamber, but I remember when 3 budgets ago, when he was Cabinet Secretary for the Economy, we had an 8.3 real terms cut to the economy portfolio. And while we've had some increase in the college funding, even though that's a bit of a disputed figure, since 2021 there was a 20% real terms cut in college budgets, and they're the very ones who are having to address the skills agenda and to ensure that we get many more people back into the labour market. So these are the concerns that I think this budget sets out. It's not just about all the different party political angles on what policies would be better in which places. There are fundamental issues that partly the convener has raised in our report from the committee, but there are fundamental issues that are being raised by the analysts who are scrutinising the Scottish budget. And on that basis, Deputy Presiding Officer, I really think we should be listening to what they have to say, because these are really serious challenges, not just for this budget, but for the next government, whichever colour that might be.
Thank you, Ms Smith. And I call Stuart McMillan to be followed by Jackie Bailey. Around 4 minutes, Mr McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First of all, I actually want to thank the Scottish Government for the announcements that were made today regarding additional resource going to different policy areas. But every budget is about challenges and choices, and the challenges the Government of the day faces at the time, and also the choices it proposes to make to deal with those challenges. A decade and a half of Westminster-imposed austerity, coupled with high inflation, has significantly eroded the value of the Scottish Government block grant funding. In addition to an ageing population and strong global economic headwinds, they've left our public services having to meet growing demand within those increasingly challenging settlements. These issues aren't new to any of us in the chamber, and we know that for the 2024 UK election, Labour campaigned to get rid of the Tories to stop austerity. Now, Mr Mara, Labour can't have it both ways. when the claim austerity came from the Tories at Westminster and that it didn't have an effect on the allocation of the budget that came to this Parliament. The economic illiteracy is an example as to why Anas Sarwar actually was right about the Prime Minister not being up to the job. It also tells me, it also tells me that both the Prime Minister and Anas Sarwar and now Michael Mara are making the case for Scotland to be an independent nation.
Daniel Johnson, briefly.
Both this financial year and next financial year, the block grant had a £5 billion increase. Is that the member's definition of austerity?
Stuart McMillan.
A decade and a half of austerity. That's the point I made, Mr Johnson. That's the point I made. Now, the Tories made a complete mess of running the government. And Labour, with its massive majority in the Commons, are now doing likewise. Now, the National Insurance contributions increase last year is a prime example of that. £400 million came out of the Scottish budget to actually deal with it. In Inverclyde, the Scottish Government put £2.2 million to Inverclyde Council last year to try to offset the problem. The 8.5% I'm sorry, Mr Mara, the 8.5% council tax increase would have been a lot less if that £400 million the National Insurance contributions increase did not happen. So, thanks to Labour, Inverclyde council taxpayers are paying a lot more money, and that's no doubt is going to be the case going forward again. I'm sorry, Mr Mara, I've already taken one. Now, this budget, with the limited powers of devolution, delivers on a range of things that will matter and do matter to my constituents. It delivers vital support for families facing cost-of-living pressures and also strengthens the public services that we will rely on. The new cost-of-living measures supporting families across Scotland, including the delivery of the new Universal Breakfast Club, offer for primary and school-aged children, and also the additional funding to extend the wraparound activity clubs in the afternoon and the early evening, are to be welcomed. On health, it means that the health service will have resources it needs to continue reducing waiting times. And also with the hip and knee operations at record low levels, and the longest waiting lists have fallen for 7 months in a row. I also welcome the commitment to replace the ageing Port Glasgow Health Centre and thank the Health Secretary for accepting the visit to the existing facility last summer. And only in the minds of the Labour Party can a positive announcement be turned into a negative. The announcement today for additional resources to hospices is something that I greatly welcome. I've got regular dialogue with the Chief Executive Officer of Ardgowan Hospice, and I know that he will be pleased with this. However, I do believe there is still a discussion to be had about a more sustainable funding method for hospices across the country. Unlike Craig Hoy and the Tories, I actually do welcome the increase in the Scottish Child payment to £28.20 per week, and also the introduction of the premium payment for £40 per week for eligible children under 12 months. That will help many of my constituents. When Mr Hoy spoke earlier on about the bloated benefits bill, this is part of that. This helps people in my community and also the communities that he represents. I also welcome the extra funding to help keep more children out of poverty from funds initially set aside to mitigate the UK Government's two-child cap. But, Presiding Officer, I am conscious of the time. One other point I do want to touch upon, and that's the additional resource for the neurodevelopmental assessments for care for children and young people. Now, I was a sub on the Education Committee when that particular committee undertook the work last year. And I've had a lot of engagement with constituents in Inverclyde about children with additional support needs. That additional resource will help families in my community, and I warmly welcome that additional resource, in addition to the additional investment in for changing places toilets. That helps people who have got children with additional support needs and disabilities to get out and about in their communities as compared to being stuck in the house. So these investments, in addition to other ones I've touched upon, and there also are others in the budget, I warmly welcome, and I do commend the budget to the Chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Macmillan. And I call Jackie Bailey to be followed by Jamie Hepburn. Around 4 minutes.
Presiding Officer, having such a short time to discuss a budget allocating £68 billion is unsatisfactory, but I'm not going to waste any more of my 4 minutes debating that point. I will, however, repeat one thing, and that's a quote. Funding allocations for health in 26-27 look increasingly detached from reality. So says David Phillips from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Excluding pay, funding is down 0.6% in real terms. It's a cut. But pay rises up by 3.75% to almost 10%. And it's NHS services that will pay for the gap. Now, I don't begrudge them a penny of that. Staff are really hard-working, but we need to ask the government where the money is coming from, because the SNP cannot tell us because they have no credible plan. Instead, the NHS are having to slash services because of efficiency savings of a staggering £1.1 billion next year. So they're giving with one hand and taking away with the other. Now, the SNP's approach is to expect public services to deliver even more for even less, and it's putting an intolerable strain on staff. Services are being slashed, and nowhere is this more evident than in social care. There is little money for social care packages. We're told that social care requires £550 million to plug the funding deficit this year alone. Next year, the level of need is anticipated to be £750 million. Not a penny in this budget to meet that pressure for some of the most vulnerable people in our society, older people, the sick and disabled. There are more than 11,000 Scots waiting on a social care assessment, an increase of nearly 28% on the same time last year. More than 2,000 are stuck in hospital with their discharge delayed. People in my constituency unable to get a care package in Argyll and Bute because they are waiting for people to die to release funds for new care packages. That is how dreadful the underfunding of social care has been. And the buck stops with the SNP government. I have another constituent, this time in Western Berkshire. He has advanced dementia and is currently in a nursing home because his family are desperate and they paid for this themselves to give his wife respite. He requires round-the-clock supervision and he's been assessed as requiring nursing home care. But the Health and Social Care Partnership were not prepared to release funding for him. They wanted to send him home today to his wife, who has terminal cancer. He has seriously endangered himself before, and the strain on his wife is profound at an already difficult time for her. I've intervened to make sure he remains in the nursing home. But what intolerable stress this places on families, and it's down to a lack of money. That is the reality of social care in SNP Scotland. Yesterday, I met with the social care providers who were deeply concerned about the government's approach. On the one hand, saying that they want to work in partnership with the sector on fairer funding, at the same time as they intended cutting £19 million from the staffing budget. The irony is not lost on the sector, and the consequence of that cut would have been job losses, slashing of services, some organisations going to the wall and returning to institutionalised models of care from the past. So I welcome what's been done on social care, and I welcome hospice funding too. Some of us, I would say to Jamie Green, have been arguing about this for a long, long time. But I'm pleased that the SNP have now U-turned, but I have to ask what this says about their motivation in the first place, given how damaging their original decision would have been. But what this tells me is that this government is failing health and social care. It's funding crisis, not prevention. It's asking health and social care workers to operate in intolerable conditions, risking burnout and without the resources needed to provide quality care. But, Presiding Officer, let me finish on a consensual note with Michelle Thompson and Liz Smith, because I do think we do need to thank the Scottish Fiscal Commission, the Institute of Fiscal Studies and the Fraser of Allender Institute for their work on shining a light on what is a less than transparent budget now and on highlighting the challenges for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bailey. I now call Jamie Hepburn to be followed by Miles Briggs. Around 4 minutes.
Thank you, President Officer. I want to start by saying I welcome the approach that some are taking to the process of pulling together this budget. The Liberal Democrats in particular, but also the Greens, actively engaging with the government to help shape what might come out of the other end of the budget is the approach, I think, that should be taken. And the inability of others to seriously engage with the process of trying to shape and form the budget actually baffles me, because what this shows through the process of engagement is that you can actually make a change. You can influence what's in the budget, and it's always going to be the case that any party seeking to engage with the government is going to be able to say, well, this budget doesn't contain absolutely everything that we'd like to see. But it is about the art of compromise that Jamie Green was speaking to. And without attempting to shape the budget, I would go as far to say that this is the abdication of responsibility. And Mr Maher is looking very exercised at the side there. I have to say, well, I'll give way to Mr Maher.
I appreciate the member giving way. I actually think it's a very fine point that he's making towards his front bench, to tell them about the process, that how you actually negotiate and come to a position. When people come to you and you say you're going to get back to them, you should probably get back to them.
Jamie Hepburn.
Let me say, I've known Mr Mara for a long time, the best part of 3 decades, going back to our university days, and I have to say, it's never struck me as someone that would be shy in coming forward to say, are you going to get back to me? And this line about it takes two to dance, and having known him for a long time, I never took him for much of a dancer back in the day, Presiding Officer, but he certainly would have thought he'd been capable of saying to the Cabinet Secretary, we would like to continue the conversation. That is a very weak line of argument, Mr Mara. There's a few things I want to refer to specifically on the back of the budget. I think there are many things to welcome in this budget. Craig Hoy says there's nothing to welcome in this budget. So let's pick up on a few things I think we can welcome. First of all, the funding that's there for GP walk-in centres, something that Craig Hoy clearly doesn't welcome, already being rolled out. There's one in Wester Hailes. I'm engaging with my local health board. I'd like to see one in my area. That's something I would have thought would be welcomed, walk-in GP centres. Second of all, it's been mentioned, I'm going to mention it again as well, the extra £2.9 million for the hospice sector. I recently spoke with Mags McCarthy of the Scottish Hospice Leadership Group, who's also the Chief Executive of Strathcarron Hospice. It's not in my area, but it serves my area. It does absolutely outstanding work. Jamie Green was right to say we'll all know about the excellent work hospices do in our locality. That money is going to make a massive difference to those organisations, something, again, that Craig Hoy thinks isn't worthy of welcoming. Thirdly, the 10% uplift in funding to colleges, again something that Craig Hoy doesn't think is worth welcoming. 10% extra for our college sector. I used to have the privilege and the pleasure of being the Minister of Responsibility for further education. I got to be able to go around and see the tremendous work that our college sector does. But I know that they need that additional funding because it's going to enable them to be able to be more responsive to and adaptable to our social and economic needs. And I'm very pleased to say that we see excellence in college provision in New College, Lanarkshire, in my constituencies. I know that funding will go a long way to helping them continue doing their good work. The fourth area that I want to welcome is the funding that's there, building on the abolition of peak rail fares, but now seeing a freeze in rail fares for the coming year, something else that Craig Hoy doesn't think is worth welcoming. Well, I know who will welcome that. The many thousands of commuters who travel from my constituency daily, many of them going into Glasgow for the purpose of work, who rely on rail transport, who are not going to have to pay any more than they do right now. They're going to welcome that. And the last thing, and specifically I want to welcome, the fifth thing, as was mentioned by the Cabinet Secretary, is the funding that's been deployed to work towards school breakfast clubs for all primary schools and ESN schools in Scotland. That's going to benefit 25,000 children in North Lanarkshire, where my constituency is. You know, when we talk about the budget, we tend to talk about millions. I'm going to talk about the thousands, and I'm going to bring the numbers down a little. 25,000 children in North Lanarkshire are going to benefit. Craig Hoy doesn't see fit to welcome that. Well, I welcome that. Families in my area will welcome that. For all those reasons and more, this is a budget to be welcomed, and this is a budget we should be supporting.
Thank you. And I call Miles Briggs to be followed by John Mason. Around 4 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. In the time I have today, I wanted to focus on two key challenges which this budget has failed to address and which I think the next session of Parliament will have to act on. And the first is the long-term sustainability of our education sector. It is increasingly clear that the challenges around the future sustainability of our university and college sectors is one of the challenges which we as a Parliament will have to face and the next government will have to deliver on. And to specifically look at what the government has done around college funding, that £70 million uplift in the budget would seem positive, but is also misleading, as the Education Committee has managed to seek clarification around. It does not account for £30 million spent on the Dunfermline Learning Campus in 25-26. Therefore, is a £40 million spend. And I think it's telling that after 19 years of this SNP government, Colleges Scotland briefing ahead of the budget was titled "A Budget to Save Scotland's Colleges," to save our college sector. So we know that many of these institutions are in financial jeopardy, and this budget might save them in this year, but it will not in future years. Institutions across the country, such as Dundee and Angus College, remain in limbo over what investment plans they can take forward. With a significant backlog in maintenance and investment in our college estates, there is no clarification on what investments can be realised, and indeed, the sector now risks losing investment opportunities as well. So a vision for our education sector is something we need. I welcome the cross-party review of university funding, which is taking place with University Scotland and the government involved. But the next Parliament will have to decide whether or not we save some of these institutions or they will go to the wall. And that's something this budget certainly doesn't seem to take into account of. The second key issue for me as an Edinburgh and Lothian MSPs, and those who are in the chamber who will be voting on this, who represent this area, I hope will also understand. This budget does nothing to address the underfunding of Lothian. Edinburgh City Council remains the lowest funded council per head of population. NHS Lothian remains the lowest funded health board per head of population. Now, we can't ignore the fact that in Scotland today we are seeing a significant change in our country. We are seeing a movement from west to east. The fact we are redrawing our boundaries for this Parliament demonstrates just that. 84% of the Scottish population growth over the next... if I got some time back...
I'll give you the time back briefly.
Yeah.
Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Deputy President. I'm grateful. I'm just wondering, what engagement did the member have with the Cabinet Secretary to get more money for Lothian? Because I appreciate I didn't get as much as I wanted, but at least I got some money for Lothian. What engagement did he have?
Well, the member will know that this is an issue for the last decade I've been lobbying the government for. Sadly, the government haven't taken forward the structural changes which we need to see. And if we had seen this budget actually looking towards a population adjustment, then I would have welcomed that. But we've not seen anything, and the member highlights some scraps from the table he's managed to achieve. This budget does nothing to take into account the growth in population and indeed the negative impact it is having on our public services. And he should know, as any of us who represent this great city, the fact that we see a growing number, in fact the majority now, of children living in temporary accommodation is linked to the crisis in our funding, which this government is doing nothing to address. And it's something which I think members across this chamber who represent Lothian need to really understand, that the next Parliament needs to look towards...
No, he won't.
I won't be able to, sadly. If only we had more time, this would have been a much more enlightening debate. But to close, Deputy Presiding Officer, this is clear that this is a budget which will get this government through an election. That is fine, that is clear. And it will pass this evening. This is maybe lays the grounds for Deputy First Minister Greer and Cole Hamilton in the next government as well. But this is not a government for growth. This is not a government for reforming our public services. This is not a government. This is not a budget which will challenge the challenges facing our country, and we will not be voting for it at decision time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Briggs. And I call John Mason to be followed by Graham Simpson in 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. In Scotland, we have a relatively fixed budget to share out, and not surprisingly, almost everyone wants more. What we certainly should not be doing is giving our limited funds to those who shout the loudest, and that is my problem with the hospitality sector. They are very organised, they get a lot of media coverage, and they shout very loudly. But I use restaurants and pubs reasonably regularly, and it is clear that many of them are doing well. Groups like DRG are expanding, so if we cannot afford a decent wage for care workers, there is no way we should be subsidising the hospitality sector further. I will be supporting the government's budget today, but I am disappointed at the slow pace of reform or replacement of council tax. I know that the SNP and all other parties, almost, are reluctant to upset voters or even have a revaluation of properties, which would probably mean roughly half the population would be winners and half would be losers. But this lack of action on council tax is not victimless. The current winners are those whose homes have gone up proportionately more in value since 1991. The victims are poorer folk in a constituency like mine whose homes have not gone up much in value. And it seems to me that the Greens have argued consistently for a major change, and they are the only party that's argued for that in local taxation. So I hope that if they are going to be kingmakers after the next election, they will make this a central demand of any agreements they make. Finally, we are trapped by a fiscal framework which, in my opinion, is flawed and biased against Scotland. The major downside of devolution is that at the end of the day, England or the UK makes all the big decisions, and they will make decisions which suit them, and that does not include treating Scotland fairly. We have historically not been able to compete with London and the south east of England, and as we were reminded by Professor David Heald at the Finance Committee this week, If bonuses rise in the City of London and English Premier League footballers secure higher relative salaries, there will be increases in the income tax block grant adjustment for Scotland. Presiding Officer, something has to fundamentally change in our financial relationship with the UK. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now call the final speaker in the open debate briefly, Graham Simpson, around 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, I wasn't called to ask a question when the Finance Secretary made her budget statement on January the 13th. That's a pity, because that would have been the first time she and I had engaged on the matter, or indeed on any matter. I didn't have the opportunity to dance with Shona Robertson, but it's never too late. What was not a surprise was that the Lib Dems would support the budget. That was never in doubt. What we've seen was a pre-election and probably post-election charade from the Lib Dems. Now, had I been called, I was going to ask about college funding, and I would have pointed out that colleges had been underfunded for years and that the increase announced in the budget was just playing catch-up and may not actually prevent colleges or campuses from closing. I could also have asked about business rates and pointed out that the budget does little for the hospitality sector, which is on its knees. And that's still the case. And we've heard from Steve Montgomery of the Scottish Hospitality Group, who says the inflation-busting rises faced by licensed hospitality in Scotland are simply unaffordable and unacceptable. I could also have asked about what council taxes we might expect, because every year under this SNP government, local government has screamed that it does not get enough, and every year they've been right. And this year, in fact, some councils are predicting council tax could go up by as much as 8%. John Swinney says that's unacceptable, but he stayed silent on a similar rise on water charges by SNP-run Scottish Water. So we're going to see council taxes soar, councils being trimmed to the bone. I don't think this budget does anything for the hard-pressed people. It doesn't help businesses, and I will not support it.
Thank you. We now move to closing speeches. I call first Ross Greer, up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'll just start by saying to Graham Simpson that if he wants the Government or anybody else in this Parliament to speak to him, perhaps he shouldn't have joined a party whose former Welsh leader turned out to be a Kremlin puppet and whose current star by-election candidate suggested that people born in the UK to minority ethnic backgrounds aren't necessarily British. Maybe he should take some responsibility for that. Presiding Officer, I do want to talk about tax in this session. Time is far too short, no. In fact, no, do you know what, actually, if the member would like to own the comments, the racist comments made by his party colleague, he's more than welcome to.
Graham Simpson, briefly.
Ross Greer ought to reflect on his insulting comments. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm easy to deal with, and I do not fit the description that Ross Greer has just made. He should apologise.
Ross Greer.
If you join a racist party, you need to own the decisions that you have made, Deputy Presiding Officer. He might be embarrassed about it, but he's unwilling to at least distance himself from it. I do want to talk briefly about tax. I think Scotland has been on a journey when it comes to tax over the last 10 years. We're now touching on £2 billion of additional revenue for our public services like our health service as a result of the progressive income tax changes that we've made over the last decade, changes proposed by the Greens and accepted by SNP colleagues. We are a wealthy country, but that wealth is held incredibly unequally. The Scottish Government's own statistics showed that recently. The top 2% have more wealth than half the population, 2.5 million people combined. But we are making some progress on fair redistribution of that wealth, and it's not just limited to income tax. On council tax, I absolutely associate myself with John Mason's remarks. The limited progress we've made, though, has had an impact. When it comes to council tax surcharges on second and empty homes, as well as the additional dwelling supplement increasing, we've raised hundreds of millions of pounds for public services, and that has resulted in thousands fewer second and holiday homes and indeed empty properties across the country. So that's thousands more homes that have become available for people to live in and tackle the housing crisis as a result of the progressive changes that we made. I do also want to take a moment to defend Scotland's social security system, a system that means this is the only part of the UK where child poverty is falling rather than rising. And Craig Hoy and Conservative colleagues are calling on us to cut that system. I would point out that the last substantive study, the last one in the British Medical Journal, as of 2022 showed that Conservative austerity at UK level has led to more than 330,000 excess deaths. If they want to take ownership of cuts to the social security system, they need to acknowledge what the consequences of those decisions would be. The Greens went into these negotiations with more money for colleges at the top of our list of priorities, and I am glad that we were able to secure that, and I recognise it was also a priority of Lib Dem colleagues. We know that the opportunity to study at college can be life-changing. We know they are essential to local economies and to our society at large. But I'm afraid I've not got time, Mr Briggs. But alongside the budget, we also secured a separate agreement with the Government in relation to the conditions attached to college funding, which I think is something that needs to be explored in a much wider context now. We know that Scotland's public finances are under huge pressure. We know if we want to hit our climate targets or our child poverty reduction targets, we require far higher levels of spending than are currently available to us, unless we change how we spend that money. When it comes to colleges and universities, we have now set new conditions in relation to eliminating the use of inappropriate zero-hours contracts, tackling the gender pay gap, for example. Huge amounts of public money goes out the door to the private sector and to large institutions like colleges and universities every year, much of it with no conditions attached at all. But a couple of years ago, we decided to make it a condition of any, for example, enterprise grant that you must pay at least the real living wage. There are now many workers across the country who are able to live above the poverty line as a result of that change. We need to start applying these fair work conditions as mandatory criteria of the many contracts, grants and other ways that the government puts money out the door every year. We need to recognise that much as we would like to have the resources directly needed to hit our objectives when it comes to child poverty, to the climate or anything else, realistically we're not going to have that resource available to us. The money we are spending, though, could be used to far, far better value if we set those kind of conditions.
Thank you, Mr Gray. I now call Daniel Johnson. Up to 5 minutes, please.
Deputy Presiding Officer, as ever, I always seek to strike a consensual tone. And if there's one point from this afternoon's debate, I'm sure we can all agree, is that Jamie Hepburn's observation is that no one wants to see Michael Mara dance. And I strongly suspect that Shona Robson is not the first person to reject such an offer from Mr Mara. But I also think we need to, from this afternoon, listen to the calmer voices. And I think in particular Liz Smith made a really very important contribution. Because we do have some very important institutions in this country. The Fiscal Commission in particular, as a relatively new body, is one that is providing very real insight into Scottish public finances, alongside Audit Scotland and the Fraser Allender Institute. And when you look at the insights they provide, it is very clear that this is not a budget that deals with the long-term problems that those bodies all consistently identify. It's not a budget with solutions, and it's a budget that I've barely started. If I could finish my point, and I'll take the intervention. It's a budget that only adds up if there are cuts in education, justice, rural economy and local government. And if you don't believe me, simply look at figure 6 in the Fiscal Commission's summary paper on this budget, which shows an over £400 million cut in the local government budget. That's the reality of this budget, and that's what the government is asking us to vote for this afternoon. Happy to give way to Mr Doris. Very briefly, Bob Doris.
I thank Darren Johnson for giving way. I'm just wondering in relation to the Fiscal Commission, who I also commend, if you believe you listen to them carefully in the area of Scotland's fiscal framework in the years ahead, which gives us far more resilience and flexibility when negotiating and agreeing budgets in this place. The Fiscal Commission's advice will be very important in relation to that.
Daniel Johnson.
This is all very well, but this is a fiscal framework that this government negotiated and then re-signed up to. And indeed, when it was first agreed, John Swinney himself held it up and claimed it as a victory for Scotland. So that this sort of retrospective revisionism simply doesn't add up. And it is this is a budget symptomatic of this government. After 18 similar such budgets, it is a budget where difficult decisions have been deferred, exceptional revenues have been plundered, and it is no wonder that the IFS, as referenced by both Michael Mara and Jackie Bailey, have said that this is a budget, when it comes to the health provisions, increasingly looks like a budget that is detached from reality. And I would say gently to members, holding up their so-called budget wins, to look very carefully at them. I remember this time last year when the Liberal Democrats were proclaiming that they had found the funding for the iPavilion. We still don't know where that funding is. Indeed, we only heard in recent weeks that that money is not confirmed. So when they hold up £7 million to deal with the delays in autism assessments, £7 million will barely touch it. It is a one-off payment for something that affects tens of thousands of people, and we simply do not have the psychiatrists or the clinical psychologists to undertake that. So do not tell me that that fixes the problem. Do not tell everyone that they fix them. And I think Miles Briggs was absolutely right. Until it deals with the deep structural problems of the health service, not least of which the underfunding for Edinburgh and Lothians, this is not a budget to take seriously. So if it makes you feel better for voting a budget, by all means, but don't pretend it's a solution, and don't take sanctimonious tones with those that have objections to this budget. But the reality is that, according to Fraser Vanda, that there is an underlying budget that sits at over 650... I think I'm entering my last... Do I have more time?
You can have the time back for Bob Doris. I can't give you any more time.
£650 million, and that is quite astonishing. And there is a simple question for this budget. Over this year and last year, as I pointed out to Stuart McMillan, this government has received over £10 billion in the block grant. And the simple question is this: where has that money gone? Because it's certainly not gone into improving public services, because there are hundreds of thousands of Scots on NHS waiting lists. We have a justice system that is well past breaking point, an education system with declining standards, and a scandal of over 10,000 children in temporary accommodation. But the problems that we have stem in part, at least, from a failure to grow the economy. Their deficit could be wiped out overnight if we had a government focused on increasing jobs and wages and opportunities for Scots. The Fiscal Commission estimate that this year's performance gap, that is, the price we pay for slower growth in earnings and employment in Scotland relative to the rest of the UK, is £800 million. Every 0.1 percentage point of additional growth in Scotland relative to the rest of the UK would deliver £25 million to spend on public services in Scotland. That's about 750 qualified Band 5 nurses, a new community hospital, or if this government's in charge of roads, it delivers about a kilometre on the A9. So where are the measures to improve productivity, grow wages and reduce economic connectivity? They're certainly not in this budget. So this is yet another disappointing budget, a budget that will undoubtedly lead to yet another emergency budget revision along the lines of the three previous ones that we've had in this Parliament. And that is why the Scottish Labour Party cannot support another budget that simply kicks the can down the road and asks a government to be elected in May to fix the problems that they've created.
Thank you. I now call Murdo Fraser up to 6 minutes. Mr Fraser.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. It's always a pleasure to follow Daniel Johnson. I agree with much of what Daniel Johnson had to say. What really confuses me, though, is if this budget is so bad, why the Labour Party not opposing it when it comes to the decision time today? I remember budget debates in the Chamber being full of drama. I remember Wednesday afternoons where we were on tenterhooks to see whether the budget vote would pass or not. Here we are in a three-quarters empty chamber on a sleepy Thursday afternoon. Nobody out there paying any attention whatsoever, thanks to the Labour Party selling the pass on this budget weeks ago. I'll give way to the Deputy First Minister.
Deputy First Minister.
Does the member agree that the one guaranteed consistency we can rely on is that the Conservatives achieve absolutely nothing out of these budgets?
Well, I've been here a lot longer than Kate Forbes has. I can well remember the Conservatives supporting Mr Swinney's budgets in a previous iteration when they were delivering good things for Scotland. The problem is this budget does anything but that, because what it delivers is tax rises for the Scottish public. Oh yes, I'll give way to the First Minister.
First Minister, briefly.
Wasn't that at a time when we had more considered members of the Conservative Party carrying out the negotiations than the ones who spectacularly failed to get anything out of this budget process?
Murdo Fraser, give you the time back.
Or maybe, Mr Swinney, it was a time when we had a more considered First Minister prepared to accommodate the reasonable choices of the Conservatives. And so this budget proposes tax rises costing the Scottish public £1.8 billion next year, although some at the lower end will see a tiny reduction in their bill, not even enough to buy a second-class stamp once a week. And meanwhile, the spending on benefits, as Craig Hoy pointed out earlier, continues to balloon out of control, rising to £7.4 billion in the coming year. Local government funding is being squeezed, services are being cut. As we heard, NHS spending in real terms is being cut, but the benefits bill continues to grow and grow. But my primary concern is around the impact on business and the economy. And today, thanks to the current non-domestic rates revaluation, businesses in Scotland are facing unaffordable increases in the rates they will pay. Just earlier this week, I had at my surgery a constituent with a small business in the provision of self-catering accommodation in Perthshire who has seen her rates bill go from zero, because she is eligible for small business rates relief, to £20,000 annually. And that increase is simply unaffordable, and she told me that will leave her having to close her business. And that is repeated right across the self-catering sector. Now, what the Finance Secretary said today, if I heard her correctly, will cap the increases at 45% over 3 years. But that still means this business will go from paying zero to paying thousands of pounds it cannot afford. Businesses are going to close as a result of the choices made by this Finance Secretary. And we see the same in relation to hospitality. You know, pubs, hotels and restaurants facing horrendous increases, up to 400% in their rates bill. We brought this to the Chamber last week, asking the government here to do the same as they did in Northern Ireland recently and put a pause on these revaluations. And whether it's self-catering, whether it's pubs, hotels or restaurants, the entire tourist and visitor sector of our economy is currently facing a catastrophe. And we will see business closures right across the country and job losses, particularly in rural areas. We seem to have an SNP government hell-bent on destroying our tourist sector because of the choices they are making. And the reliefs announced today are welcome, but they come nowhere near far enough to addressing the increases that many businesses face. And this Cabinet Secretary will preside over the death of Scottish tourism unless she thinks again. Well, they're groaning, presiding officer. I think they should go out more and to talk to people in the sector and hear some of the case studies we've heard, because that's what's going to happen. Businesses at the moment currently paying nothing, seeing their increases in bills to thousands of pounds. And, presiding officer, we also see retail impacted. The SNP manifesto at the last election pledged to restore parity with England for firms liable to pay the higher property rate. But what we see for the coming financial year is that all premises liable for the higher property rate will pay £226.5 million more than their equivalent-sized businesses south of the border. And that gap has dramatically increased, because in the current financial year it's just £54.7 million, and it's going up more than 4 times. And as Liz Smith pointed out, we have an issue in the rural economy, because we see the removal of the small business scheme from sporting rates. Now, sporting rates are charged on sporting rights, whether you exercise them or not. Most farms across Scotland will have sporting rights, will be getting for the first time ever a rates bill, one they never had before because they were eligible for small business relief. This is a government that says it's interested in rural Scotland. It doesn't look like that from where I'm sitting, presiding officer. So, presiding officer, as these taxes go up, services are being cut. Professor David Bell, giving evidence to the Finance Committee, said of the Council settlement, the overall position is severe and it will become critical. So we are likely to see record-breaking increases in council tax set by local authorities across Scotland, meaning it won't just be the income tax and business rates that go up. So overall, this is a budget that hikes taxes, damages the economy, sees cuts in local services, and the only gainer will be the welfare bill. It is not a budget that deserves our support. But it's so disappointing this budget is going to pass nonetheless. The Labour Party have given this budget a free pass. They will let this ruinous budget go through, damaging local services, hitting councils and ruining the economy. And as for the Lib Dems, well, I think this is a preview of what we're going to get later this year if the SNP end up as the biggest party, Lib Dems selling their souls to put the SNP back into power. Alex Cole-Hamilton has spent the last 2 years courting Anas Sarwar. Suddenly now he's courting John Swinney. He wants to be the Nick Clegg of the current decade. Anybody thinking of voting Lib Dem at the election needs to reflect what they want to do and put the SNP back into power, presiding officer. We won't do that. We'll stand up against them and we will oppose this budget.
Thank you. I now call on Ivan McKee to wind up the debate. Minister, up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This Government is proud to bring forward a budget underpinned by our priorities, placing families at its centre and delivering a more prosperous future for the people of Scotland. The decisions we have made continue to protect this Government's social contract. Free prescriptions, free bus travel for 2.4 million people, free tuition for students and more than £6,000 in early learning and childcare support for each eligible child. This budget goes even further for families, increasing wraparound support, more investment in activity clubs and a universal breakfast offer for all primary school pupils, more sports, making sports more accessible for children with £20 million for a summer of sport. And taken together, these measures will reduce cost of living pressures, support children to move more, eat healthier food and enable their parents to get to work. Other child poverty measures include a new annual £50 million whole family support package, contributing to our ambition to eradicate child poverty, £49 million boost to the Tackling Child Poverty Fund, taking it to a total of £61.5 million. A commitment to begin work towards introducing a new Scottish Child Payment Premium, estimated to benefit the families of around 12,000 children, plus a commitment to full funding for the next financial year for the Investing in Communities Fund, supporting the vital work communities groups do across our country. Taken in the round, it's clear that this budget is underpinned by this Government's top priority to eradicate child poverty. This budget recognises, indeed.
Craig Hoy, briefly.
The Minister for taking intervention. He and I don't agree entirely on much of what he just said, but research by the Scottish Government shows that there are now behavioural changes emerging as a result of the Scottish Child Payment, including parents turning down pay increases, working less or putting more money into pension salary sacrifice schemes. Isn't the best way to lift children out of poverty is for their parents to have a good, well-paid job and not be turning down work?
Minister.
Members recognise, of course, that this is an in-work benefit, and it's very clear now we're starting to get some more details from the Conservatives as to which parts of the welfare bill that they want to cut, and I'm sure the people of Scotland won't thank them for that as they take steps, or attempt to take steps, to reverse the reduction in child poverty this Government has delivered. This budget recognises the vital role public services play in the day-to-day lives of our citizens and in Scotland's future, investing more in community justice services, more in health and social care services, delivering a record of £15.7 billion to local government. And today the Cabinet Secretary set out how we're going even further to support local government by allocating further £20 million, which they can use towards funding the real living wage for adult and childcare sectors. It's also a budget that offers a new approach to public services, with new high street GP walk-in centres as an example of us thinking differently to ensure much-needed services are accessible, and work will also be taken forward to develop a new approach to supporting individuals with complex care needs to move out of hospital and reduce inappropriate hospital admissions and out-of-area placements by providing tailored, community-based support solutions. This also includes funding to deliver across our public sector more efficient services, with £29.9 million funding to support the Invest to Save programme in the year ahead. And this budget, alongside our public service reform strategy and portfolio efficiency plans, supports this Government's efforts to deliver better services more efficiently for the people of Scotland. And economic growth is also essential to ensuring the sustainability of strong public services, and this budget supports that through investing £47 million to strengthen local economies, support the regeneration of local communities and town centres, £2.4 billion in post-school learning to enable everyone to reach their full potential, £93 million to build critical offshore wind infrastructure and develop the supply chain, plus 25% additional relief for the next 3 years for licensed hospitality and music venues, including pubs, restaurants, hotels, nightclubs and licensed clubs liable for the basic or intermediate property rate. And for those businesses, we're providing more support than the UK Government is. This announcement takes the total relief for eligible licensed hospitality premises and music venues to 40% over the next 3 years, capped at £110,000 per business per year, plus, of course, the specific relief offered for the self-catering sector. Will I get the time back, President Officer?
The time back, Minister. Paul Sweeney, briefly.
Thank the Minister for giving way. There is a case in Glasgow that's been brought to my attention recently. A major hotel in Finnieston area has just had a rates revaluation at 250% increase, and as a result they're pausing a major investment of £25 million, which would create 100 jobs. Clearly no one wants to see that. Would you look at this particular case and see if we can have a bit more leeway in the adjustments?
Minister.
Paul Sweeney will know that the process for assessing rates is carried independently by the assessors, but the relief package that we have put in place, I have no doubt, will be of benefit to that particular business, and I'd be very happy for him to write to me about that. And I've got news for Daniel Johnson. Scotland's economy is growing faster than the UK under his Labour government. I'm assuming it's still his Labour government, and he identifies a supporter of them, and if he doesn't, he might care to let us know. This budget includes an investment of £5 billion of climate-positive spend in 26-27. The First Minister's announcement earlier today to freeze all ScotRail fares is just another example of a supporting investment to make our public transport more accessible and promote sustainable travel choices. But, Presiding Officer, aside from the support from the priorities of the people of Scotland that this budget delivers, we have, I think, shone a light in this process on how politicians in this chamber approach this most important matter, how we raise and allocate the resources people out there rely on. Jamie Green put it well, talking about that new style of politics, the contrast between those who work constructively to make a difference and those who cart from the sidelines, the relevant and the irrelevant, those who choose to tangle, as some have put it this afternoon, and those who choose to sit it out. And this is something that the people of Scotland will notice. This government looks forward to continued constructive engagement with all parties that choose to do so. And the shy Mr Mara, as he was described earlier by Jamie Hepburn, I've got news for him. The budget process works on the basis of opposition parties coming forward with proposals which are then negotiated with the government. Jamie Green gets that, Ross Greer gets that, Jeremy Balfour gets that. Michael Mara chooses not to. And I want to just quote a minute from the meeting of the 2nd of December that Michael Mara took part in. Said further engagement will take place subject to receiving proposals from Scottish Labour Party that we can consider in more depth. Presiding Officer, we're still waiting, and he's been asked already through this debate this afternoon to provide examples of what he asked for. All he asked for was more and more and more data. He never come forward with any concrete proposals. And turning briefly to Mr Hoy in conclusion, Presiding Officer, at least his pretence of engagement, he has no pretence of engagement. Mr Balfour got more out of the budget than all of his ex-colleagues added together. From Mr Hoy, just more incoherent calls for more spending on the one hand, along a £1 billion cut to revenue on the other. So to conclude, Presiding Officer, this budget will strengthen our infrastructure, improve our public services and ultimately make life better for Scottish families. And I hope members recognise the benefits this budget will bring for the people of Scotland and vote in favour of the bill today. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate on the Budget Scotland No. 5 bill at stage 1. It's now time to move on to the next item of business. The next item of business is a consideration of motion 20719 on a motion on legislative consent for the Medical Training Prioritisation Bill UK legislation. Call on Neil Gray to move such a motion.
Moved.
Thank you. The question on this motion will be put at decision time. The next item of business is consideration of motion 20738 on a Scottish Parliamentary Corporate Body motion on amendments to the Scottish Parliament salary scheme, and I call on Jackson Carlaw to speak to and move the motion. Mr Carlaw.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On behalf of the corporate body, it falls to me to move this thrilling and compelling motion to update the Scottish Parliament salary scheme. The amendments to the scheme implement provisions of 3 Scottish statutory instruments made under the Scottish Elections Representation and Reform Act 2025, which will prevent an MSP from simultaneously holding office as a member of the House of Commons, a member of the House of Lords or a local councillor. The provisions implemented in changes to the scheme ensure that any member holding such a dual mandate cannot be remunerated for both roles simultaneously. So I move that the Parliament, in exercise of the powers conferred by sections 81(1), 81(5)b and 83(5) of the Scotland Act 1998, resolves that with effect from the day of the poll at the first general election for membership of the Parliament, following the day in which this resolution is approved, the Scottish Parliamentary Salary Scheme is amended as follows. A, for paragraph 2.2, substitute for any period during which a salary is payable to a member of the Parliament pursuant to a resolution of the House of Lords relating to the remuneration of members of that House, the yearly rate of the salary payable by virtue of the scheme to that member for that period shall be reduced by 2/3. B, after paragraph 2.2, insert 2A. No salary shall be paid to a member of the Parliament in respect of any period in which the member is or was also a member of the House of Commons. This does not apply to any salary payable to a member of the Parliament in their capacity as the First Minister, a Scottish Minister, a junior Scottish Minister, the Lord Advocate, the Solicitor General for Scotland, the Presiding Officer or a Deputy Presiding Officer. And 2B, if remuneration is also payable to a member of the Parliament in respect of the same period under regulations made under section 11(1) of the Local Governance Scotland Act 2004, then the amount of salary payable to the member shall be reduced by the amount specified as payable to a councillor who is not designated the leader of the council, the civic head or a senior councillor by whose regulations made under section 11(1) of the 2004 Act. And in paragraph 2.1, after sub-paragraph 2, add 2A and 2B. I hope you're resting and can answer questions on that in follow and repeat, but I move the motion in my name.
Thank you, Mr Carroll. More riveting than you might have predicted. At this stage, the question on this motion will be put at decision time, and I think we are going to suspend briefly before moving to decision time.